Hello and welcome back to the Innovate Eco podcast. I'm your host, Rob Regglesworth, and this is the podcast where I interview planet-positive founders who are taking direct action through building businesses to tackle environmental problems that we face. If you're new to this, then welcome. If you're coming back and you've listened to other episodes, then thank you very much and welcome back. For those that are new, the premise of this podcast, as I said before, interviewing planet-positive founders, but I am doing that now sort of every other week, bringing on a different founder to hopefully inspire people out there to start their own thing, or for people that are already building their businesses to learn tips and tricks, or also for anyone that's just generally interested in this kind of stuff. Alongside that now, you may have noticed every other week I've started a sort of side series called The Startup Diaries, which is where I'm now trying to build a planet positive business of my own called No Longer Known, a sustainable fashion brand which is doing things a little bit differently. So if you haven't listened to that already and you think that might be interesting, then do check it out. If you want to find out more about No Longer Known and what it is and what we're building, then just go to nolongerknown.com. And you can follow that journey along and stuff from this podcast as well. If you go to probably the best places, the Instagram or YouTube. If you go to @RobReg at either of those, you can find clips and other things that we're doing there too. So I'll post links to all this in the description below. So yeah, today's guest is Emily Power. Now, Emily Power is building the company Oceanmade. And Emily is a former Microsoft marketer turned entrepreneur who is on a mission to replace as much plastic in the world as she can with seaweed or kelp. And she's doing this primarily initially by tackling a very prevalent problem which we get into in this episode, which is plastic plant pots. And yeah, I was completely unaware of just how big a problem this is, but I guess as we dig into, it's pretty obvious to uncover quite quickly just how many plant pots there are, just how big an industry that is, and just how big a problem that is that Emily's trying to tackle initially. But yeah, in this episode, we cover loads of background. Something I really enjoyed was how a former guest who we had on this podcast was actually an inspiration for Emily, not necessarily through the podcast, actually through an episode of 60 Minutes, but I thought that was really cool that this kind of ecosystem of people working in this space, building businesses, inspiring others is genuinely happening. We talk about how Emily originally set out to build the green version of Amazon, but realized that quite quickly that was maybe too much too soon, and how she learned from that. We talk about how to validate your startup idea with zero experience in an area and how to do that through lots of persistence and cold calling. We talk about the problem, as I said before. We talk about why this is such an issue and why other alternatives in this field have failed before. We talk about the unexpected benefits on the land as well as at sea from seaweed-based products. And we talk about things around marketing and how maybe targeting initial eco-conscious customers is not quite enough, and how do you get to that next phase, and the experience that Emily can bring in from her background in marketing. So really enjoy this episode. Emily is a really cool founder, full of energy, really cool chat. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I'll be back at the end with a few closing remarks, but without further ado, here is my episode with Emily Power from Oceanmade. So hey Emily, it's great to have you on the podcast. I'm really excited to chat today.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, Rob.
So always like to do a little bit of background research before my guest comes on. And while I was looking into your journey to Oceanmade and your background, I was really excited to notice a name that we've had on the podcast previously, which was Bren Smith. So Bren Smith, as you call him, the kind of godfather of seaweed farming in the US. And yeah, one of my favorite episodes I did. And I agree, really inspiring person to speak to. So I love that because it's kind of coming full loop with the podcast and one solution linking to another one. So I just wondered if you could take us back to that point to start with.
Yeah.
And more specifically, kind of how hearing from Bren led to you were at Microsoft at the time, I believe, how it maybe changed something in you, and yeah, many people's idea of perhaps a dream job at Microsoft, how things changed for you then.
Yeah, I would love to share that story. Let's see. Well, I have to say my love for the ocean started before I ever heard from Bren Smith, but that's really where my journey with seaweed began. And it was while I was working at Microsoft. I'd been there for a few years, and I went home to have dinner at my parents' house on a Sunday night, and we ended up watching 60 Minutes that night, and I saw an episode with Bren Smith on it, and he basically said if you have like $50,000 in a boat, you can have a seaweed farm, or I think it was $20,000 in a boat, you can have a seaweed farm. And we just got to talking in my family because Bren had outlined all of the reasons why people should have a seaweed farm and all the amazing, incredible things that seaweed can do and all of its magical properties and how it's just like nature's gift to us. And we just are not taking advantage of this thing that has just been given to us. And I think after that episode, my dad and I were just talking about, we should have a seaweed farm. He's like, I've got $20,000 to invest. And I was like, I could get my captain's license and I'm going to quit my job at Microsoft and we're going to start a seaweed farm. And so we really did look into it. And it turns out that Bren was not correct. It is not that easy. You can't just start with $20,000 in a boat and have a seaweed farm, at least not here in Washington. It turns out there's a whole lot of red tape. There are some really strenuous processes, a lot of permits that you have to go through, a lot of parties that you have to go through. And so, through this exploration, I was talking to basically anyone and everyone that had been exploring this idea of seaweed farming. And, I was talking to some guys that were the first people to have their lines in the water. And, they were basically like, we've got the like growing part of it covered, but what we really need to focus on is like, what is the market? What do we do when we pull this seaweed out and how do we sell it? How do we market it? What is the market for it? And at the time I was like, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to be a seaweed farmer. But it made me think a lot about what is the market for seaweed. And, honestly, like since then I was truly hooked. And because my background was marketing and advertising and sales through Microsoft, I couldn't stop thinking about the market applications. And from there, my wheels were just turning. And that was like 7 or 8 years ago. And honestly, I have been hooked on seaweed ever since. And every time I talk to somebody, it's like once they realize what seaweed is and what it can do and all of its amazing properties, they become instant seaweed nerds. And even if you're not an instant seaweed nerd, you start to fall in love with this idea and you get deeper and deeper and deeper. And I've just really loved to see how over the last 7 or 8 years that I started learning about seaweed, how many more people have been falling in love with the idea of what seaweed is and what it can do. And that's been a really exciting thing for me, I think.
Yeah, I remember speaking to Bren and like it feels like such a simple solution in so many ways. Seaweed, something that it feels like it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And when he was talking about this solution, and it's a solution to potentially so many different things, which we'll come on to, it is really fascinating. And one of these nature-based solutions that ticks multiple boxes, right? So it's like you're not just solving one immediate problem and finding a market fit for that, but then there's like all these additional benefits on top, which is what makes it so cool. So at that point, so was it really as simple as that? You went, that's it. There must have been a transition period, or were you in the next day into Microsoft and
I fell in love with seaweed and then I quit the next day. No, it wasn't that simple. But I think after that point, I realized that maybe the journey I was on just was not where I wanted to be for the rest of my life. And I had this love for the ocean for most of my life. I had interned at the Seattle Aquarium when I was really young. And then when I graduated college, I worked at an advertising agency that then I managed the account for the aquarium. And then when I left from Microsoft, I ended up joining the board for the aquarium, and I've been on it for 10 years. And so, you can see this love for ocean conservation throughout my entire life. But I think seaweed was kind of the catalyst for sure. And I think it was really around like, I wanted to be a seaweed farmer. It turned out that wasn't going to be a great idea. I was just kind of exploring what are the market opportunities for seaweed. And then I think it was when COVID hit, where I think like everyone else, it just makes you take stock of your life and rethink like all of your life choices. And I unfortunately lost a family member and a family dog during that time in like a really short span. And I took some time to grieve, and I just felt like, man, I'm spending my entire life putting ads on the internet for companies that I don't necessarily care about or brands I don't care about. And it feels so weird and manipulative to be just like selling things that people don't want or need, while simultaneously realizing that there are all these market gaps for seaweed because there's such a lack of consumer understanding, or just like not a cultural awareness of how incredible seaweed is. As my husband lovingly calls it, the toilet paper of the ocean. That, people think about it as that slimy stuff that just washes up on the beach,
Yeah.
or things that cause algae blooms. And they just don't, it's not in a great position in people's mind. But I guess my opinion is, if we could make kale sexy, I think we can make seaweed sexy. And that really sort of became like my mission at that point. So when I
Yeah.
left Microsoft, the idea that I had for Oceanmade was basically, what are products that we can sell that are made out of seaweed, or maybe other marine waste or marine resources. And I was like, that's it. That's what I'm going to quit my job for. And I did. And I was really jazzed about it, and it seemed like a great idea at first. And it's not that it wasn't a bad idea, but through that process, I think what I really learned is, yes, there are a bunch of random things that are being made from seaweed, a lot of innovations. A lot of those are in the business to business application space. And there's a random assortment of things that are in the consumer facing space, but trying to create a marketplace that was for seaweed based products that are not based in like one category it was just too random. And I also learned that is not how people shop. People do not go to a website based off of a material to find a product. They look for a product that solves a problem in their lives, and then they hope that it meets any like sustainability goals that they have, or is made out of a material that they want. But ultimately, I think it was a good reminder that, as altruistic as people want to be, what they care about is solving their own human problems. And you need to have a product, a service, or a solution that solves that problem first and foremost, and then use that as an opportunity to engage them in the material that you're using, or a little level up of, this is more sustainable than the current alternative that you're using. So the beginning idea for Oceanmade was a bit of a bust, but it's always sort of been rooted in this idea of leveraging seaweed and marine waste materials.
That is a fascinating start, and it's not the first time actually I've heard a guest talk falling in love with the solution almost before the figuring out the exact problem. And it can definitely be done, but as you quite rightly point out, I think it's much easier if you've got a clear problem that you're solving for someone, and then it happens to have all these additional benefits as well. You're pulling rather than, or you're pushing rather than pulling.
Yes.
It's that it's much easier to do. I read that you said that you started out almost trying to create like the version of Amazon, but for seaweed, right? So it's a bold ambition, and maybe you'll still get there, but I guess it's maybe the logical way, I guess you're approaching it now, is like one thing at a time, and then you'll eventually be the Amazon of the the ocean or whatever, but in a good way, rather than kind of aiming for that straight away and then figuring out how to put the pieces together.
Yeah, I think my vision has shifted since then. I do think that I ultimately would love to use Oceanmade as a way to introduce marine materials and waste materials into people's lives and be more conscientious of the materials that they consume. But it's funny, through this entire process, like, that idea made me realize I was honestly just putting ads on the internet again for other companies, and finding that so many of them were greenwashing. And I was just feeling really frustrated with like the understanding of like, we are all consumers and we live in a very consumer first society, which also means a waste first society. And so even now I still kind of like, I cringe a little bit at the idea of having made a product for people to consume, just because through so much of my journey, I've really learned that, we really need to figure out the best way to reuse the existing things that we have, and not just continue to consume more. So we'll see about that, being a competitor with Amazon. But I would really love to help people think more critically and thoughtfully of what it is that they're consuming. And I hope that we can help do that through Oceanmade.
Nice. So let's dig a bit more into to Oceanmade now as it is. What was the moment where you kind of sat there thinking, which product is is it going to be to find that kind of initial problem? Were you kind of scratching your head for a while thinking there's got to be something? Was there a genuine eureka moment where you could remember?
Oh, there was a total genuine eureka moment. I remember it so clearly. It's funny because, like you mentioned, with the first iteration that I had for Oceanmade, it felt like I was like walking around with a key, and the key was seaweed, and I was trying to unlock doors, and they were not working. And that can lead to a lot of frustration. I had quit my job. I had broken free of the golden handcuffs, which is terrifying. And I was like, when am I going to make money? And like, what am I doing? Have I just destroyed my life? And I honestly was just feeling so frustrated and disappointed in myself. So I would go out in my garden as a great way to alleviate stress and anxiety and basically just procrastinate what I was supposed to be working on. And I was sitting there transplanting a plant from a plastic pot into my garden bed. And I was just thinking about like, wow, okay, there's plastic pots, there's plastic bags that our soil comes in. There are plastic tools. There's plastic that you find in supposedly organic soils and fertilizers. And I just realized like I'm surrounded by plastic, and I've been doing all of this research into seaweed and the innovations that exist now. I mean, people are creating packaging, textiles, pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, food additives, so many different things like leathers. I think somebody's even working on like batteries or electricity.
Really?
And
Wow.
it was just this moment of like, okay, there's so much in this seaweed space that's going on. And I was using seaweed as a fertilizer in my garden already, and I've used it as a biostimulant, and it's really great for plant health. And so I'm sitting there thinking about like all of these really cool structures like that Notepla has created, or Sway, and how neat all of those were, but they're more business to business applications. And I'd always wanted to support those organizations, but being a consumer, there wasn't really a way for me to buy those products. They were products that get sold to then companies who use that material in whatever product they're creating for a customer. And so I'm just sitting there having all of these thoughts, and then the clouds just parted and a little like ray of sunshine came down. And it was like, ah. And I thought, okay, structures, fertilizer, what if we just put those two things together? And that's how the idea for Kelp Pots was born.
So there was a genuine eureka moment. I love that. And it is more common than kind of joke about it that people have these eureka moments, but that is often the case, that maybe it was there in the back of your mind or something you thought about before, and then it just takes that coalescing of things and events to really bring it forward. And it's one of those as well, when you say it out loud and when I hear you talking about it there, it's such a everyday thing that's there in front of everyone, anyone that's gardening, and it's just such a given that that's the way that plants are packaged, and that's the way that actually, it's not saying that it's easy to come up with a solution or get into that in terms of something that scales and can compete, but in terms of like a problem that we need to solve, it's become, and it speaks to how reliant we are on plastic, I guess, doesn't it, and how prevalent it is in everything that we do, that perhaps we don't even blink when we go to a garden center and literally everything is covered in plastic.
It's literally everywhere, which is just insane. But it's funny because once it popped into my head, the idea seemed so obvious that like, why hadn't anybody done this before? And I think it's an interesting just kind of moment, sitting there realizing that one idea that I had wasn't working out, and because it wasn't working out was the reason that I had this other idea. And maybe it was just I was uniquely qualified to come up with this concept because I've been weeding since I could walk, and I have had this relationship with the aquarium for forever, and then I fell in love with this idea of seaweed. And it's very funny how just any little tiny decision in your life can ultimately lead you to the thing that you were always meant to do. And it was just so funny to me that like, as soon as I had this idea, I went on the internet and I started looking it up, and it was just crazy to me that it hadn't been invented yet. Which led me to understand.
Kind of double and triple checking, like it must be.
Yes, I became like an expert on how to search for patents, because I was like, this has to exist. It makes so much sense, and it turned out that it didn't, which is insane. And I had been using a bunch of alternatives to plastic in my garden because, like, you don't think about how much of it is just surrounding you. And when you do, you really kind of get grossed out. And so you start looking for some of these alternatives that, can solve a problem, the same problem in a different way. And I just felt like none of the existing biopots on the market worked at all. Nothing could compete with plastic, which led me into researching a little bit more about, okay, well, what is the gardener journey? And this is very typical of people who are starting out and growing. You are, a novice gardener, you're brand new, you're just trying to keep plants alive. So you'll use whatever the garden center gives you or whatever somebody tells you to do. And all of those things are usually packaged in plastic, and you're usually not starting from a seed. You're starting from like a plant that's already existing. And then you get better and better and you become more confident. And suddenly you have piles of plastic pots sitting in your garden or in your shed. And you start to get a little grossed out with that. And so oftentimes people will then say, well, what other alternatives are out there besides plastic? And a lot of people will turn to these biopots. And then these biopots just don't do a good job of solving gardener problems, whether it is not retaining enough moisture, whether it's breaking down too fast or not breaking down fast enough, or strangling your roots or creating mold or algae growth on the plant. And then they go back to plastic.
Yeah. And I'll admit myself, I've tried a variety of different biodegradable ones, and issues with mold, issues with them just not degrading quickly enough or too fast.
Yeah.
So yes, very keen to eventually, when you're stocky in the UK, I'll be there in line.
Thank you. I love that support. Hopefully we'll get there soon.
And so I guess when you were doing that deep dive, and apologies if you don't have this to hand, but I'm sure you do, but did you start uncovering some of the, as you got deeper into how big the problem was, do you have any go-to stats for just how big a issue this is? Because I imagine horticulture and plant is something that people on the surface, you might go, oh, that's not a big industry, it's just a few people buying plants and then you start to think, actually, there's a lot more to it than that. So do you have any kind of go-to, how big is this kind of problem you're trying to solve?
Man, it's such a big problem. And if you think about it, I mean, billions, if not trillions of plants are being planted every year. Not all of them are done in plastic. A lot of people will direct sow things. But I believe it's the global gardening pot market is worth something like $24 billion right now.
Wow.
And that's just the gardening pot. That I don't even think that's inclusive of nursery pots, and it's not inclusive of biodegradable pots. But when you think about, anybody from a home hobby gardener to, the nursery or where you get those, to farmers, to agricultural centers, to reforestation projects, to specialty cultivated plants like cannabis or wineries or just anything, we really, our whole life is about, plants around us. And I don't think people think about that very often. But
if you're not actually involved in the planting, that's going on all the time, right? Everywhere, all the time, but you just don't see it. So it's not as obvious as a water bottle on the shelf, because everyone sees that, right?
Yeah. So there's a lot of plants out there. And as far as plant pots go, people are like, well, I can reuse them, and I'll just recycle them. And here's the thing. Most of them are not recyclable. If you have a black pot, that's not recyclable. They don't recycle them. And even the ones that are recyclable don't get recycled. It's less than the average amount of plastic that goes through recycling systems that end up getting recycled. And then you're like, okay, I'll hoard all of these plastic pots and I'll use them forever. That's what I did. And then you realize that these plastic pots really are not intended for long use, especially the black ones that are kind of really thin and crunchy. Those do degrade. And that means that they're leaching chemicals and microplastics into your soil, which is disgusting to think about given everything that we now know about microplastics and how they're prevalent everywhere.
Yeah, it makes my skin crawl.
I know, right? And the grossest part to me was then realizing that plants are the root system is like a fiber optic cable, and they can absorb microplastics and these chemicals into their roots. And so when you're eating plants, you might be ingesting a microplastic. They're inside it. They're not just on it. They are in there. And so even if you're getting organic plants or things like that, if they've been grown in a plastic pot, there's a possibility that could have microplastics or forever chemicals leaching from it into your soil. And that to me was suddenly just very disgusting. And it was like, honestly, do we need plants grew for billions of years before the invention of plastic. I'm pretty sure we don't need that. And now I'm like a conspiracy theorist about, big ag around all of the tools and things that they sell us and the problems that they invented in order to sell us solutions that we don't need. And I have been finding, like, through my gardener experience, as I become less of a novice, and I'm not a master gardener by any means, but I hope to be there one day. And I've really learned, like, there doesn't need to be plastic in gardening, and I'm still finding ways to get it out of my garden because it's such an ingrained material in our processes and all of our tools that it's difficult to do that. But I mean, honestly, like, we just need to take cues from nature. Like, she did it for a long time before plastic ever came around, so, like, we can do it too.
Such a great philosophy to adopt. Think of how would nature do it first and foremost, which is what we've not done for the past however many decades, and using plastic. And I don't think it's a conspiracy theory to suggest that there's a lot of vested interests in agriculture and various things that aren't too good for the environment. And it doesn't sound like a conspiracy theory at all when you actually unpack it.
Yeah.
And it's like very simple kind of business model requires this to happen, therefore there's a vested interest. So I don't think you're a conspiracy theorist at all suggesting that. And I wasn't surprised as well, as you say, to hear that there's so many different problems. And you mentioned when we chatted last time briefly that you're kind of uncovering all these additional benefits on top. So as I said earlier, you've got the immediate issue of plastic, and that's so prevalent within gardening and horticulture. But then there's the additional benefits of the kelp itself and the seaweed itself. And then you mentioned other benefits that you're uncovering in terms of, like, actually on the land as well as at the sea.
Yeah. There are so many. And, I should preface by saying, I mean, I think I mentioned my background is advertising and sales and marketing. So I'm not a crop scientist. I'm not a material scientist. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a manufacturer. I'm not, like, all of these things that normally would require knowledge to create. I've created a biodegradable container that's made out of seaweed for gardeners, and all. You would assume that those are the backgrounds you need to have, and I didn't. I was just a consumer that had a problem that I wanted to solve. And, thinking through this deeply, I was like, seaweed seems like it's going to be the answer. Coastal communities have used it as a fertilizer for forever. I've heard about all of these amazing binding properties that it has, the alginate that can help retain and regulate moisture, all of these just amazing things. And so, I think I don't want to say I lucked out, because I honestly do think that this was maybe Mother Nature being like, finally, somebody wants to make the thing that I've been trying to give you for forever. So a lot of things worked out in my favor really early on. We had a couple different ideas for prototypes and formulas to test this. And my initial goal was, like, let's just not kill the plant as it's in there. So we were doing these studies against, like, plastic and other different types of biodegradable containers. And my goal was honestly just to keep plants alive and go from there as the basis of how do we develop this and make it better. And honestly, the first versions that we decided to field test worked better than I could have ever hoped. And so it turns out that seaweed really is just this magical thing that can solve a lot of problems. And we just hadn't used it in that application. Like you mentioned, it does make a great structure. It has pretty good binding properties in there. The alginate does help with water retention and regulation because it is an algae-based material. I've noticed that it helps prevent algae growth on the container itself. And in addition to, like, things that it does just for your plant, as the pot breaks down, it also kind of acts as a soil amendment. It breaks down into a compost, and the microbes love it. And the beneficial insects love it. And so this thing, once it gets planted into the ground, starts to break down really quickly and helps basically increase the microbial activity around your plant, which not only helps your plant, but also helps the soil structure around your plant to improve the overall soil quality for maybe potentially surrounding plants or for the long-term health of your garden. But honestly, even just beyond the application that a gardener or a grower or a farmer would use is all of these additional benefits that seaweed has to supporting the ocean. It is one of the most sustainable or regenerative materials that we have on this planet. It stores carbon better than almost anything, or it sequesters it, and then it grows really fast. So you can harvest that over and over and over again, unlike peatlands that do a great job of storing our carbon, but take such a long time to build up and are such a fragile ecosystem that it's a much more reliable resource to use. It creates a great ecosystem for any surrounding animals. It improves the water column so that if you're doing things like aquaculture or growing clams or shellfish or anything in there, it increases their strength by reducing the ocean acidification in the water column. It helps reduce the temperature of the ocean. It's also a complete food, meaning you could live off of it. Every other breath that we breathe, I think, comes from either macroalgae or microalgae in the ocean. And so there's just like all these amazing things. And I just really, as a person who's always, loved gardening, loved plants, but also really loved the ocean, it just felt like such a I started to get goosebumps when I realized all of the connections between the ocean and then the land, and how it really, really is this closed looped system. We're taking seaweed out of the ocean that has sequestered carbon from our atmosphere. It stays stored into that material. We process that into a pot. That pot goes into the ground, and that carbon gets restored into the ground where it's supposed to be. And the whole time it's also helping you, a gardener or a grower, solve your problem by giving you healthier and more resilient plants and improving the soil quality and structure of your ground.
I mean, it's almost like nature's been working on these solutions for millions of years, right? It's like, it's not until you unpack it, and then make those connections, it makes perfect sense. And we're not putting chemicals into the soil that shouldn't be there, and then figuring out how do we get them out of the soil again, and microplastics in plants, and it makes so much more sense. And
it really does. It was
it
was a big cornerstone to that realization, man, Mother Nature really just knows what she's doing, right? Leading to then what do we put in the rest of this pot, and how do we form the thing? Because it's not 100% seaweed, but we use all organic material. Anything that you could put in your compost pile is what we use, and we don't use any additional glues or binders. And it's really using. I'm trying not to share too much because I know my IP lawyer would be like, stop oversharing. But what I can tell you is that we use all recycled organic fibers. So we help people take basically what would be a waste stream of an organic material, and we use that with our kelp pots. And then we process things through water. So there are no additional chemicals or additives or glues or binders that get added in there. We're simply relying on the binders that nature can provide. And so we really are only using materials and tools that nature would do, so that they can return to nature the way that they were intended to. Because nature didn't invent waste. We invented garbage. And it's honestly just a poor design and we don't have a resource issue. We have a design issue. And that to me was very fascinating. So thinking about how do you incorporate regenerative design into products. And that to me has just been where my mind is at right now. And what do we do in terms of developing more products beyond kelp pots that are more regenerative and using only the materials that nature gave us?
Amazing. So you kind of hinted to it before. I was going to go into that, which would be useful, I think, to our listeners when we're talking about if we've come up with an idea, or you think you may not be from that background, as you said, you're not a material scientist. I actually feel like it sometimes helps coming at it, because you don't know, how, if you were a material scientist, you might have just immediately dismissed it and said, "Oh, this is not going to work." I don't know, but it's I think for someone who comes up with a solution and maybe they're thinking, "Oh, that's not really my thing. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a material scientist." How did you go about kind of taking it from that eureka moment to? It sounds like you had a bit of luck in terms of things just working out, but I imagine it wasn't as simple as you. So and then in terms of the sourcing of the seaweed as well, and how that worked, I'm really intrigued to know, for anyone listening who's maybe might have a similar idea in the back of their mind.
Yeah.
How does how does someone go from just a scribble on a notebook to actually making something like a reality?
I love that question. Well, first, if you have an idea in a notebook and you're like, I can't do this, tell that voice to shh. You can tell that voice to be quiet. You don't have to have all of the answers. You just have to know how to find the people that do have the answers. And you have to feel confident in yourself and your idea, to just go out and talk to people about it and be tenacious about it, and not be ashamed, and not be afraid to share. A lot of people will feel like, oh, I don't know if it's a good idea. You're never going to know until you tell enough people whether or not it's a good idea. And before investing a bunch of money and resources into doing that or quitting your job, you should find out if it's a good idea and validate that, which is what I did not do when I first left Microsoft. And so the first thing that I did after having this eureka moment was, hopping on the internet, finding, does this thing exist? Finding out, no, it doesn't. Then feeling suddenly discouraged of, okay, well, if it doesn't exist, then there must be a reason. People must have tried this and it failed. And so if I try this, it's going to fail. And then I had to tell that voice to be quiet, because it may just turn out that no one had thought of it yet. And so I think I probably had like 300 cold calls, just networking my way through things, reaching out to people on LinkedIn, and just not being afraid of that. And I think maybe, having a background of sales and advertising, I felt a little more comfortable hopping on the phone with somebody, but I used to prepare like so much for these, and it was so exhausting. But I didn't want to come off like an idiot. I think what you're getting the sense that I had a lot of imposter syndrome in starting this, and that's super valid. Everybody does.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Yeah. I think the curse of knowledge is almost worse than imposter syndrome. I think Albert Einstein has a quote that, creativity and imagination is more important than knowledge. And I fully believe that. And that's really just what I followed. And it's funny, in talking to manufacturers and my manufacturing partner now, when we prototyped these and then we brought Kelp Pots to manufacturers, they were like, this is not the way that we would have done this. And if you had asked me to do this, I would have done it a different way. And I don't think that different way would have worked. And so it's really interesting thinking about like, okay, well, I just didn't know what was right or wrong because I have no experience in manufacturing whatsoever, that I was just like, let's try it this way and let's try this. And, I found that in these creative ideas or thoughts or questions that I would pose to experts, my favorite part was watching their eyes or their, just their face light up a little bit with like, oh, that's an interesting thought I've never thought of before. And that is, I think, what gave me sort of the reassurance to keep going and to let that voice be a little bit more quiet, that if I'm coming to these people who are so, so smart and they know everything about what I need to know, and I'm asking them these questions, and I'm not afraid to sound dumb, and seeing, their faces go, oh, wow, yeah, that's pretty neat, tells you that I might be onto something. And so if that's what you're experiencing, definitely continue seeing it through. And honestly, it was just through, I think, those like 300 calls, coffee chats, meetings, whatever it was, that when you've talked to 300 people and they tell you it's a good idea, it'd be kind of rude to like not pursue it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. And I'm really torn on the whole. I've heard this over and over again about the validation of the idea, and like I get it, like, but there is a fine line between, and I know I fall into this trap sometimes of like looking for perfection, and then not pursuing something because, and then there's the whole challenge of well, what would that have looked like in terms of how many would you have had to. Would you have had to create something? Would you have just done a render? Like, how would you have put that in front of the right people to like validate the idea? Like, I guess, just going around and speaking to people was probably good enough, as you say, even though it was 300. That's quite a lot. Definitely validated after 300. But yeah, like just, I think it's there's a fine line, as I say, between just getting going and waiting for everything to be aligned, because it never is. No one I've spoken to on the podcast so far, I think, had a solution from day one that still looks the same as the company or the product on day 100 or whatever.
Oh yeah, definitely not. Like it changes every day, and the direction that I thought I was going, even when I first started Kelp Pots, is not the direction that we're going now. And it can be tough to decide and to make those decisions for sure. But I think, if you talk to enough people before investing a crazy amount of money, it gives you the confidence to go out and spend more money. I wanted to find what was the least expensive way that I could just determine this, because I'd already spent some money on this other version of Oceanmade, and was trying to just be really conscientious and scrappy. But I think it was, after all of those conversations that I could be onto something. It did justify the larger amount of money that I did need to spend in getting prototypes made. I think I spent about $10,000 on, working with a team on building different iterations and versions of this that we could get into a state where it would be in the form that could be tested against plastic and other biodegradable pots. Like, I had made like a seaweed paper like pot at home with like DIY paper mix that one of my suppliers had kind of showed me what to do, and was creating it myself, and knew that wasn't going to be the version that would allow me to test it in the market. So that wasn't going to answer what I needed to answer. It's this recognition of what answers and information can you get for yourself, and then where do you need to invest money to make it the thing that you need to make it, at least at the bare minimum. And I think that's where that concept of like MVP, the most minimum viable product, comes in. Mm-hmm. And you have to spend a certain amount of money to get it there. But once you do, go into the market and really validate it. I had 300 and some people tell me that this was a good idea, but nothing is a better proof point than making somebody put their money where their mouth is, right? And so we had spent some money on developing this prototype. We had field tested it. It worked way better than we could have hoped. But during that time, I was taking furious notes and had all these ideas. How do we improve the formula? How do we improve the structure? How do we improve the design? What are things that we could do here and there? And at that point, I could have probably been like, okay, let's invest more money in getting a lab, getting scientists, getting field testers, doing all of these things to like put out the perfect product maybe 2 or 3 years from now. Or I could take the minimal viable product that seems to have worked better than I hoped and put it in front of people and see if they actually believe that it's a good idea by buying it.
That's you made the right decision there. Yeah, and I've heard it time and time again where people squirrel away because it's the easy option, isn't it? You have to be very bold and brave to put something actually out there and ask for people's money, right? It sounds simple, but actually in reality, when it's your product and something that you've kind of, you must have at that point put so many hours of kind of thought and and heart into it, that finally putting it out there and asking for money is a big step. And it is easy in a way to just go, you know what, let's spend another 2 years refining the product, and let's redo the website again, or that kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah, huge important lesson, I think, to anyone.
Yeah, you have to be aware that or okay with the idea that you might get rejected. That's really hard as a personal thing. Yeah. But someone once told me that if it's not scary, it's not bold enough for you. And that really stuck with me, because I love taking bold approaches or unconventional approaches to things. And, I don't think coming to the market in this way was unconventional. I think it actually might even be the framework of the lean startup. But I think it's just one of those things that you have to make a decision that you as a person could invest all of this money and time and waste more time on that, or you could just get rejected right now and then get over it, right? And so do you want to waste a lot of time and money to get rejected later, or do you want to get potentially rejected now? Or you probably won't get rejected, but you can use that opportunity to find out what's wrong with your product or with your service or your idea. I had thought about hiring people to field test this or do a run with a bunch of beta testers, but I realized I could just leverage customers to give me that feedback. And why not go through an iteration of this and then take all of the customer feedback of people who are actually using the product in various applications and use that to then say, okay, now I have firm, concrete evidence about what needs to be changed in this, or what would help gardeners even more. Now let's go out and fundraise. Now let's go get a lab. Now let's manufacture this or explore this in a different way. And that's based off of just repetitious, proof points from people who would actually be using the product. And there's nothing better than you can get than that, is paying customers to give you feedback on your product. And then they believe in it and they want to see it get better because they've been invested in it. And it's been a really great journey, I think, with a lot of people that have used this pot, to just see how excited they are that it does what we've said that it does. And then they have all of these ideas that we could go out and do, and they just willingly share that. And I so greatly appreciate it.
That's really, really interesting. It seems to be becoming more and more of a strategy. I've noticed getting into the marketing side of things is like building in the open, building transparently, sharing the failures, and then bringing that community along with you. So you mentioned there, so have you kind of started to develop this community of fans almost who are there for you as you're developing along with it? And was that a plan from the start, or is that something that kind of has surprised you a bit?
That was a surprise. Um, we had launched our pre-sale in January as basically my way of saying, like, does the market even want something like this? A bunch of people have told me it was a good idea, but were they being nice or blowing smoke?
Yeah.
And just wanted to see if that was real. And we sold out of our pre-sale in less than 2 weeks, which was incredibly exciting and really did validate that for me. And then people really started giving good feedback. But one thing that I did find as we launched this, and I think you and I had chatted about this a little bit before, around, we saw a lot of excitement from people who were really interested in sustainability and ocean conservation and environmentalism. But when we had launched this pre-sale, we had just done it online and we didn't do any advertising. And so it was just sort of word of mouth. And we started developing this community of people who really believe in this concept of seaweed and being a regenerative material and how great it is for the ocean. But I'm really right now trying to do a better job of building up this community more with our customer base. We had a lot of people buy the product that weren't gardeners or growers that were like, oh, I've got a grower in my life and I'm going to give this to them. And they're really excited. And I love that. But I'm super hyper aware of potentially being like the shiny new toy in the sustainability space. And, another innovation could come in and they could forget all about Oceanmade and Kelp Pots. But we are starting to build more of that community among growers. It's just a very different approach. Growers don't tend to be chronically online as much as, some other people. They're out in the soil, they're in the dirt, they're growing things. Yeah. And it's funny because it all sort of makes sense when you reflect back on it. Like, I leave my computer to go play in soil when I'm feeling stressed out. And so like, I hate sitting at my laptop for a long time, and it's just a different mentality. And so it's just a different way of approaching your audience and finding them where they're at. And from there, we've started to really build a great community of people and, micro farmers and growers from across the state of Washington. And we've had a lot of interest from people across the globe. So many people have reached out to me from Africa, a ton from New Zealand, Australia, the UK. And it seems like there are a lot more people concerned about, finding alternatives for plastics in different countries than America. So it's been fun sort of having a bunch of different networks of people that are supporting us. We've got these sustainability folks. We've got more of these local growers that can give us direct feedback on the application of it. And then we've got all these potential, markets and things that we could go after on a global scale of people who are really interested in using their local resources and their local seaweed to create a version of this that would work in their marketplace. So it's been fun.
That is fascinating. I guess I have spoken to people in the past about this challenge around accessing parts of the market that aren't just as easily accessible through like social media or channels I imagine you were used to using when you were working at Microsoft and you were like doing digital advertising and stuff like that. So I imagine having to figure that piece of the puzzle out was, I guess, an ongoing challenge. And
yes,
I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. From my experience, it feels like there is almost this critical mass you've got to get to where word starts to spread and kind of throughout communities. And when you do create something that people love, eventually it does get out there, but it must be almost a little bit frustrating when you have that background and you know how to like do a campaign or scale something to potentially a younger, more online audience. Yeah. So like, I'm interested to know, I guess, what you've found on that side of things, and then maybe what you have been able to bring
Yeah.
from that background that maybe you could share that's been particularly useful.
It's funny, coming from a sales and advertising background and then, stepping into this as, quote unquote, inventor of something. It is fascinating how quickly your brain shifts and changes. And, you're thinking about all the very like nuanced things that you need to care about in what you're creating. And, you do start getting that like curse of knowledge again, that like, these are the things that I care about right now. But that doesn't mean that's the thing that your audience cares about. And I think that's a big connect between people who are building a product or a service, is the stuff that you are like very interested in. And you think that the things that you think would be interesting don't always match what other people would find interesting or the way that you need to solve that problem. And it is funny that like, I definitely have, I don't want to say I've struggled with it. It's just, it's required so much thought, and strategy and perspective, even though I am my own target audience and even though I have a background in sales and advertising. When you're too close to something that you're building, it is very important to get outside perspective and to be reflective very much on what works and what doesn't. And it is funny, you mentioned that I worked at Microsoft. I worked for a search engine, Bing, the search engine that Microsoft
Yeah.
powers. And so I hopped online and I was like searching for all these search terms that, like let me build a Bing ads account for myself and a Google account, and I'll do SEM and SEO. And search volume for biodegradable containers is like 12 clicks a month. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not high,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that at first was really frustrating, where it's like, dang, I can't use all of this experience that I have in SEM and SEO because it doesn't seem like this is a product that people are searching for. Oh no, they probably don't want it. And that's not it. That's not it. You just need to think more critically of, okay, well, if people aren't searching for biodegradable containers, like, are they being bought? And yeah, there are lots of competitors in the biodegradable space. It's just that there's a lot of consumer confusion. And so it's taking stuff like that to understand insights and not seeing them as failures, but seeing them as opportunities to learn. Yes, there are not a lot of search terms for, the thing that I'm creating, biodegradable pots. But are there search terms for peat pots? Are there search terms for fiber pots? What are people searching for? And then it turned out that there's just a lot of confusion on what this thing is. And so I have taken that away as one of the key cornerstones for us is around education. Through all of the research that I had done on my potential customers and my market, and why didn't they like biodegradable pots, or why aren't they searching for them? A lot of it was user error, or I would actually say it's a failure on the company's part to correctly educate people on the use and edification of their product. And so if somebody came into using a biodegradable container and they treated it just like a plastic pot, you're probably going to have bad results. And it's on the company to explain that to you and make that pretty clear. And I don't think that that was the case in a lot of the bio pots that I had tested or used. And even going back and doing like a packaging competitive analysis, and what is it that they're sharing, and where did I fail in the process of using that product that I might not have if I were better set up for success. And then taking that information and making sure that people understand how to use your product, understand the landscape a little bit better, understand how it solves their problem and why it's good for the environment. And so that's really our strategy now. I've always wanted to help people grow things better. And the way that people learn to grow things better is through education. I think a lot of people are maybe intimidated by gardening. And it feels like you need to have like a PhD in like soil microbiology and all of these. And you don't. It's, you literally just stick a seed in the ground and let nature do its thing. And what's that quote? Nature finds a way, or life finds a way.
Yeah.
And it does. And then you just need to learn and tweak from there. And gardeners and growers love to learn, and they are excited to try new things, because the more successful you are with growing, the more confidence it gives you to grow more things, grow a new thing, try growing things from seed, maybe invest in more space to grow a wider variety of things. And it's fun because, sometimes you fail, and sometimes you're really successful. And I think there are a lot of parallels that you can pull in from gardening or growing into how to sell or how to market things, that like not everything is going to work, but the only way that you're going to find out what doesn't work and what does work is by trying it and see what fails and what doesn't fail. And then just don't give up. Like just keep learning from that. And it can be hard because especially like in gardening or growing, you feel like if you've made a mistake, you can't come back from that. Because like, sometimes growing seasons are pretty short and tomatoes take a long time to grow. And if you plant a tomato seed and it takes 120 days to mature to, fruit, and you don't know if it's going to fruit until the end, like you can't go back and start a tomato plant over. You have to give the season a rest and you have to try again. And I think that's a really interesting metaphor for how to apply that in, your marketing tactics or your approaches. Is there's a time to be reflective and to learn and to take those learnings and to try again in different strategies and think about, are there multiple different ways I could try it so that I don't fail again, just completely. Let me try growing tomatoes 3 or 4 different ways. And that gives you the confidence to keep going. And so I know I went off on a little bit of a tangent, not fully in how we answer that question, but I do think that it is really important that if you are creating a product or a service that you are trying to sell to people, it is very important to find people where they're at. And just because you're not seeing success on one channel or one platform doesn't mean that it's not a good idea or that you won't see success. It just means that maybe your market isn't there. So think about why isn't your market there? Are they really not there? Or are you approaching them? Is your messaging wrong for that? But if your messaging is good and your product is good, it just might not be the place where they are. So where are they? And do more of that research and don't be afraid to find out. And then, like you said, I think you reach that point of where they just start sharing it and they talk to their friends about it. And we haven't fully reached that point yet, but I do hope that we can develop more of a cultural following or a cult following. Like somebody gave me this example of when Lululemon entered the market. They came in with these yoga pants, and yoga pants aren't new, but they had a patent around it that was really around all of these problems that they're solving that yoga pants have not done. And they developed a cult following and people fell in love with them. And then, other players came into the market, and it's kind of like, well, why should I buy a $200 pair of yoga pants versus, a pair I can now get for $50 that's pretty similar. And consumers right away rejected that idea. They were like, it's Lululemon or die. And I think that's really fascinating that you need to be thinking about, like, if you're inventing something or working on a product or service and somebody can literally copy you or come in and undercut you, why would they still buy your product over someone else's? And that's why I felt very strongly about coming to the market with a consumer-facing product. Because if we're going to create change in a massive way, more people need to know about it than like a few farmers that I could have onboarded. We could have worked with micro farmers and gotten feedback from 4 or 5 people, but those 4 or 5 people aren't going to go out and evangelize a product the same way that somebody's mom would, because it was the perfect addition to her garden, or the thing that a new gardener who's killed everything and thought that they had a black thumb tried it and they were like, I'm the garden of envy now. That person is going to go out and be your evangelist for free. And really, if we want to change the way that people perceive and see seaweed or the way that they consume products, it's through bringing them along in that journey and helping solve a problem for them, educating them in it, and making them feel like they are making a difference all along the way.
That's such a good a good message there. I really I think it comes back to what you said earlier about going bold and being I think so many products just created and just thrown onto kind of Amazon made half-heartedly, and then a copycat comes along, and then it's like, well, that was a perfect example. You've got to create a culture around it. You've got to create the brand value around it and the story. And, you've done that so well already in terms of like having that founder story, as we've talked about today, and connecting that beyond, because then already I feel much more connected to it because of that story than if I just stumbled across it on Amazon and thought, oh, that's a nice, slightly less impactful pot, and then I might use it and forget the name and all that. So to be thinking about that from day one, I think is quite interesting, and yeah, definitely a good lesson for anyone who's out there who's thinking about particularly building a to consumer brand, as you say.
Yes.
Like how cult is an interesting word, but it has to be, you know,
It really
it
does.
has to be a cult
Yeah.
like following. Yeah.
You really have to sit there and say, does this solve your problem? And if it does solve your problem, you know, why me over someone else? And you do have to build
Yeah.
that relationship. And I really encourage anybody who is thinking about doing any of that, like your customer has to sit in the room with you all the time. And I'm lucky because, well, I wouldn't say it's lucky, it's why I invented this, but I am my own customer base, so it's pretty easy for me to sit there and think about what the problems are that I would experience as a gardener or grower. But you know, that's why having all of these conversations with your audience is so important. Like there's really no point in inventing something or creating something if it isn't something that somebody will use or believe in. And the storytelling component is so incredibly important because you're right, there's just so many. Anybody from China can come in and make a copycat and put it on Amazon and undercut you. And then, you know, you've kind of, then you're out of the game. And I think that's really sad and really difficult for so many people who are trying to do good things.
Yeah.
You know, and it, you know, one of the foundations that we really talk about at Oceanmade is it is so important to do well while doing good. You have to be very thoughtful in your business approach, and it's difficult to balance the passion that I have for sustainability and environmentalism while also thinking with a business mindset first and a customer mindset first. So yeah, I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent, but it is just, there's nothing more important than understanding your customer, the problem they have, and how you can help them solve it. Like you are not the hero in this story. They are the hero in this story. You are just Yoda that's giving them a lightsaber, and you have to teach them how to use the lightsaber. Otherwise, they're going to cut their head off. You know, sorry, maybe not a great example, but it's important because things can be used wrong and they can be dangerous, or, you know, they could burn themselves with this lightsaber and be like, oh my God, I'm never touching that hot thing again. But, you know, then you can go off and be a Jedi, and you want people to feel like they are the Jedi in the story, and you are little Yoda teaching them how to become the hero of the story.
Yeah, no, and yeah, the cult, it becomes its own thing, doesn't it? And if they love the product so much, they're gonna almost, the founder just fades into the, you know, not the, like fades away over time, and the brand becomes its own thing and its own living kind of entity almost. So that's the ideal, the hope, I guess. And it leads me quite nicely on to, I guess, this tricky kind of, you mentioned educating the market and educating people, and kind of when you're creating something that has all these positive benefits and it is using nature-based solutions, sometimes it works out that it's much cheaper. And the ideal is, I guess, like you'll come in with a product that not only solves all the problems, but it's also half the price, and then everyone wins and they fly off the shelves. But I don't know where you're at on that kind of journey. And you know, it's so difficult in so many situations now where I mean, the one that always springs to mind is clothing, for example. Like we're so used to being able to buy whatever we want for next to nothing. And you ask someone to explain, how do you think, you know, a t-shirt can be made for $1, and you know, think of all the steps. And there's such a jump up from that price expectation to how much it costs in reality. And that's just talking about like fair wages, let alone the environmental impacts that kind of come, the externalities that come on top of it. So big question. And I guess it's probably an ongoing challenge, but like, how do you find that balance between like educating people that they should be paying more for a premium product that's really good, but then also, as you've talked to multiple times already, like solving a problem and trying to kind of charge too much for a premium straight away.
Yeah, man, I could go on forever about the frustrations that I have in the like hurdles and challenges in for people who are trying to make good things. Like take, for example, our pot is made from all materials that can be composted. Okay. To get a certification that I could put on the package of my product to tell you that this is compostable is like $5,000. And then people who just make plastic pots can just like do it for no added money. So like that's a cost that I have to consider passing on to the consumer, right? And just to prove to you that it's good. And I just get so angry about that because it's like, wait, I'm sorry, why are we making people who are making way better products and materials pay for those things that they have to pass on to the consumer when the people who are doing really bad things can do it for free, and that allows them to enter the marketplace for really cheap? And so when I think about things like plastic materials, look, there is a cost to plastic. It's just that our system hasn't been designed to make the people who are making it pay for that. But ultimately, like plastic is just as expensive, if not more expensive than any of the materials that we're creating. It's just that we haven't paid that price yet. That price is coming for the next generation, and people keep passing that cost on to the next set of people because they are more concerned with their bottom dollar than doing what is good or right. And that is infuriating. And it's a problem that anybody that's an ecopreneur or somebody who's invented a really green product needs to deal with. And, you know, I will say like our product is more expensive than a traditional plastic pot, and it is slightly more expensive than biodegradable pots. And that price could have been higher. I opted not to put a compostable label on our packaging because one, that was a cost I was going to have to factor in and add to the consumer. Two, it's made from all compostable materials and it's plantable, so you can kind of insinuate that. And if you are so concerned about it being compostable enough that that's the deciding factor between you buying it or not, like you're probably already on a really strong sustainability journey anyway. And great for you. You are the type of person that probably does a little bit more research into these things. So then you'll research my product and you'll find out that it is compost. I'm just not going to pay for that right now and pass that cost on to consumers because my product is already more expensive than others. But here's the thing is my product is not just a pot. And so I think it's really setting out how is this a differentiator between what exists right now and how we're solving a problem. So like kelp pots are, yes, a structure that holds your plant in it and protects your seed as it grows. It also has seaweed-based fertilizers and nutrients embedded into the wall. So as the container breaks down, it slow releases a fertilizer for your plant and the surrounding soil. And as it breaks down, it actually also amends your soil. So you're getting basically a threefer. And there is nothing else on the market that exists like that right now. There are people who create biodegradable containers and they basically stop there. And, you know, there are compostable and biodegradable materials that do help improve the soil structure or can, or could if they were maybe better designed. But it's thinking through what are all of the problems? Can we solve all of the problems in one? And now I'm telling you, you don't have to buy synthetic fertilizers or chemicals for your garden. You don't need to go out and buy expensive compost, and you don't need to go out and use plastic pots. And suddenly it's like, okay, well, I can justify a higher price then because I will see success with my plant without having to go out and buy all of these things, which if you're new to gardening is also, again, very intimidating. How much fertilizer? How much compost? What is the ratio? What am I doing? I can't tell you how many things I've killed by over fertilizing them. And like, it's just as dangerous as not giving them nutrients. And so this is really designed to help people grow things better, more easily, without having to buy all of the other crap that I feel like big ag has told you that you need to buy. The answer is really in nature. And, you know, while we will be working on other products and solutions to help people along the way and become better gardeners, it's really starting with a product that can differentiate yourself enough from the traditional existing solutions that make people want to pay for it. Because here's the thing. People are habit forming and they are narcissistic and they are selfish. And I'm sorry to say all of that, but innately it's true. We're animals, right? And what we care about is ourselves and the problem we're going to solve. And so if it isn't just as convenient, if it isn't just as cheap, if it doesn't have just as much effectiveness or efficiency, if I can't get it in 2 days like I can on Amazon, like you have to be hitting those buckets in terms of competitiveness to bring anything to market against the current solutions that frankly are like not good for you and aren't good for the planet, but are the cheapest thing that currently solves your problem. So you really have to think critically about all of those things. And, right now I can't deliver it faster than you can get on Amazon. And I have stayed off of Amazon intentionally. And it's not as cheap as a plastic pot, and it's a pot you only use once, whereas plastic you can reuse for a while. But it does all of these other things that make you realize maybe I don't need so much of that other stuff. And it's kind of an all-in-one solution. So I think we really kind of lucked out there. But yeah, I would say my advice for anybody really starting out and doing that is think critically about the problem you're solving. It has to be better. If you can't meet all of these other buckets, you have to have an amazing product that really solves the problem. And if you don't, you do need to adjust your strategy and think about how you can make it cheaper, how you can make it, I don't know, or even just like that storytelling piece that they feel good using it, even if it doesn't solve the problem better. Like, how can you appeal to some of those things? So yeah, I don't know. It's a game. You gotta just do a lot of critical thinking. I think that's kind of the key thing that I'm taking away from this is it takes a lot of thought to introduce a product to the market. Even if it's better for people, even if it's better for the environment, you're coming into a very competitive, combative, aggressive marketplace with bad actors who have no incentive to change. And all they care about is money. They really don't care about you or solving your problem as long as they get theirs. And that is disgusting to me. And that's, again, why I feel like it's important to do good, but also important to do well, because maybe we can be guides or examples to people that you can still get rich doing the good thing or the right thing.
Yeah. And that was like the whole reason I started this podcast was a frustration with, as you say, just feeling like everyone was evil, and there was like, everything was stacked against it. But as you say, it's if we can make it work, make products and make things work within the system we've got. Some days I would love to just overthrow everything, and I'm sure you have days like that too, and start again and do things different. But like in the time that that I've got, what can we do within the system that we've got? And if we can create businesses and circular models, which sounds is just using nature really in the way it's meant to be, then when we can outcompete the solutions that are there, then that's that will feel even more satisfying when when we finally get there, Emily. It will. Yes. I promise.
We have to.
Amazing. Well, we have to.
Like, honestly, if we're going to be a human civilization that lives on this planet, it survives and thrives, like, we have to find we can't keep building our future for the materials that destroy us. That's just not how it's going to work. No. And so we do have to get there eventually. And it's absolutely an uphill battle. And you're right. Sometimes I want to throw everything out the window and like maybe like, I don't know, sell Oceanmade and then like move to a plot of land and like no one can find me. But I think I'm in a situation where like if I can't do this, then who can? Like, I don't have a mortgage, I don't have children, I don't have debt, I don't have anything, and like I feel like I almost owe it to people, and I think that keeps me going a lot. But we all need to work to fight together, because the people who are in charge are really rich and they're really powerful, and they have no incentive to do anything for anyone else.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Please don't do that. Quite, we need you. We need you working on this solution, just like as many people working on these kind of solutions as possible. Which I guess brings me on to there's so many other things. Like, we could chat for hours about this stuff, I'm sure, but conscious of time and things. So I just wanted to, before I get onto my 3 questions, which I've pre-prepped you with, that I ask all my guests, just in the spirit of kind of advice to potential founders out there, or people that are just tinkering with an idea or have a potential idea that they want to start. Is there any other last bits of advice you haven't you've already given us loads of great tips and bits of advice, but anything else maybe that's surprised you on your founder journey that would be useful to share with anyone that's out there, that's been a good lesson that you've learned?
Yeah, I think that, we touched on it and I alluded to it through all of the phone calls and the things that I had, but it is really not what you know, it is who you know. And it is so important to have those conversations, and every person in your life has value, and to be really open to discussing your idea. Here's the thing, like, ideas are brain farts, and it doesn't mean it's going to become a reality or that somebody's going to steal it from you if you share it. It is so
Yeah.
important to be open and honest about that idea, to verify whether or not it's good. If you're concerned, get an NDA, but like literally nobody's going to steal your idea. More people are interested
Yeah.
in helping you achieve it, and they're busy in their own personal lives. Like, there isn't anyone that I talked to throughout all of this that was like, great idea, I'm going to take that from you. It was like, how do I help you get there? That's pretty neat. I'm busy with this other thing that I'm doing, but I'd love to stay involved in your journey. And that was even when I was like, I don't know how much I should publicly talk about this, because we did end up filing multiple patents on this product. And you do need to be careful if you are bringing something really novel to market. And we don't need to get into the details of the patent process. But if any of your listeners are going through that and they want to chat about it, feel free to reach out to me. But it's really talk about it. You don't need to put it on a website. You don't need to publish like a newsletter about it, but one-on-one conversations, you do need to share that. And you never know who is going to lead you to the person that you need to meet to make this vision or an idea a reality. And that happens to me every step along the way. I think it took me maybe 8 or 9 months to network my way to the people who could help me prototype this product. They're called Fun Stuff Designs. They're a great design team. And I never would have met them if I hadn't been attending like random seaweed calls, and like things about the industry. And, you know, it was through that my current supplier actually reached out to me and was like, hey, I heard you're working on this product and I might have a material that might work for you. And they ended up connecting me to Fun Stuff Designs. And it's funny how like then all the pieces start to fall in place. So, you know, I've said, don't be afraid of talking to people. I know that can be easier said than done, but you just have to get over yourself. It is not about you. It is about whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And these people have your answers. And so you have to just look dumb and go ask. And yeah, again, it's really about who you know and the answers that they have. And like, you will not be successful if you try to go at this alone. You just won't.
Look dumb and just ask is a great quote.
Yeah.
I'm going to write that down. But yeah, I always remind people, like, imagine trying to build the business you're trying to build 50 years ago, when you literally would have had to go around and knock door to door, and you would have definitely got some angry responses then. But like, the opportunity now, it's paralyzing in a way sometimes, because it's just, the world is so big and there's so much opportunity, and it often doesn't compute with our kind of monkey mind. But the opportunity and the connections that you can make very quickly, as you say, like 2 or 3 conversations down the line, and you found someone who can prototype it, whereas that might have taken years before. So I think that's a really, really great piece of advice, and sounds simple, but definitely not. No matter the solution, I think that getting past that imposter syndrome and getting yourself out there and putting it out there is.
And you know, I would add to that, like, if you are really afraid of it, they're great tools. Like ChatGPT is an amazing tool. AI is really great in helping you do things faster and with more knowledge. And I will say I definitely leveraged tools like ChatGPT to research topics in depth before talking to somebody or hopping on the phone with them, or even like running their LinkedIn profile through like ChatGPT, or if they published any articles or anything like that, using that to help me like take these really complex like concepts and terms into like layman terms, like a dummy like me could understand, so that I didn't look like such an idiot walking into some of these calls. But you know, like, ultimately there's only so far that AI can take you. And I've definitely like run in, it can't answer all my questions. There's only information and knowledge that humans have, that you need to talk to humans in there. And yeah, you just got to do it. But you can help prep yourself, like, I think.
Yeah, like, people are already starting to roll their eyes at anything with AI in it, and it's like, I've had multiple solutions on here utilizing AI for good, but you can utilize the tools. They're there now. They're out there. Like, people are using them to create silly memes and stuff. Like, if they're going to be there, let's at least use them for good. So
yes,
I'm completely with you on that. So the final 3 questions that I ask all my guests, Emily, thanks so much for It was a really interesting conversation, and yeah, some really great lessons in there and tips and things. So thank you. But yeah, my final three questions. The first one is in the spirit of sharing the wealth and getting as many of these businesses started as possible and creating solutions so we can take on the invested interests. Do you have any business ideas or that you've scribbled down in the past that you wish if you could clone yourself and do another business at the same time as Oceanmade? Are there any businesses that you would be willing to share with anyone out there that's trying to find the idea?
Oh man, I was thinking about this one for a while, because I have like ideas all the time, but like I said, they're like brain
Yeah,
farts, and I don't know
yeah.
if they're going to be good. Again, so just saying any idea that I put out there, I don't know if this is going to work, and this isn't really business
That's
advice.
the
You
idea.
know what
It
I
can be a
mean? Like,
brain fart, but someone will take the brain fart and make it into something amazing.
like I thought about like, ooh, I would love to see somebody like showcase all the different ways that you can use kelp as a food. Like, what about a kelp cafe or a kelp restaurant? And then I'm also like, ooh, there's so many things in there where I could see that going wrong. And so, but one of the other things that was an idea that I had a while ago, that I really loved, but I just really didn't know how to make work before I ever got involved with this concept of Oceanmade is, um, finding better ways to connect people with volunteer opportunities and like fundraising opportunities and ways to get involved. I think we all sit there and go, oh my God, okay, I have all this anxiety about the environment and all of the current problems. And like, I get it. Plastic's bad. This is bad. Everything, too much water usage is bad. Like, you're bombarding me with all of these things. What do I do now? Now, what do I do?
Yeah, yeah.
And I sit there and I don't know. Like, how do you solve all of these problems? But I would love to see like a tool or a platform that um, connects people to organizations, volunteer opportunities, things that they can do that are like, if you are concerned about X, these are actionable steps that you can take to solve that problem, whether it's donating time, donating money, donating resources,
Mm.
signing, petitions, calling congressmen or whoever your politicians are. But just, I think we're all dying or just so desperate for the solutions era now. We've all bombarded with, we've been through the problem era.
Yeah, definitely.
We fucked around and we found out, and now how do we fix it? And I think so many people don't know what to do. And I would absolutely use the heck out of a program that I felt like I'm concerned about something and now I can log onto a tool and you can actually give me advice. And it's things that I can do in my normal life. I would love to see like a
Mm.
varying degree of things, and actions you can take beyond just don't buy this, do buy this, but like
Yeah.
an educational tool, that kind of thing. Like, people want to be equipped with what to do.
Yeah. That's such a good idea. I love that. Yeah, too much of like don't do this and then but then what? And I think just joining these dots. Love that. The next one is the billboard question. So yeah, if you could put a quote on a billboard to be in your nearest big city that would get a message out there to the general public walking around on their day-to-day lives, what quote would you put up there? It can be your own quote or it can be attributed to someone else.
Um, okay, so I live in Seattle, Washington, and going back to the
Mm.
very beginning of our conversation, the seaweed industry here is still not what it needs to be. Like, we need more sustainable seaweed farms here, and there's like maybe two or three guys out in the water with lines out there. And I'm going off on a tangent, but it's relevant, I promise.
Yeah.
And so, as I was thinking about this question, and especially knowing that it is relevant to Seattle, I wanted something about seaweed. And there's a quote that we say, that I was actually looking at putting on like a t-shirt, is "In kelp we trust." And just have it be that, because I think that makes people think, but I think it also says a lot in the back end of that. It's the normal phrase is "In God we trust," so there are some spiritual or religious undertones there around a guide or a lead. um,
Mm.
and in America, In God We Trust is on the dollar bill, so there may be some economic implications there. But this idea of In Kelp We Trust. Well, why is kelp something that we should trust in? It's a good conversation starter. It maybe makes people pause. It doesn't have anything to do with Oceanmade directly, but my hope is that it could inspire people to start to think about seaweed and why it's important, and start to explore it and start to have these conversations. And from there, I hope that could inspire change in our local area to get people to support seaweed farming, and tell our legislators that we don't need all that red tape. We need to have more seaweed farms out there. Our kelp forests are dying. We need to regenerate the ocean. We need to have more of these things in there. And so, yeah, I think In Kelp We Trust would be the billboard I would put up.
Love that. And I would buy the t-shirt as well. If you make one, let me know.
I actually had an idea. I love the idea of a hat that says In Kelp We Trust, and then fuck plastic on the back. Sorry, I don't know if I can. I'm sorry.
Amazing.
Bleep that out.
Yeah, no, you can. I'll it's all good. And then finally, any books that you've kind of read recently or in the past that are particularly they don't have to be relevant, they can be anything really, but that you particularly would like to recommend to anyone that's listening?
I'm going to totally disregard your instruction. This is not a book. And the reason I say that is I'm just at a place right now where if I'm going to sit down and read, I'm trying to do it to sort of decompress and separate myself from thinking about Oceanmade 24/7. So something around business or entrepreneurialism isn't something that I particularly feel like reading right now. Although I did read all of those books when I was starting out around, what are the conceptually, what do you need to know from the lean startup and, 0 to $1 million and whatever, and Blink. But I have been really into podcasts recently. So maybe I know I'm disregarding instruction, but maybe you'll like this.
No, I like it.
And the reason being is because I'm at a place right now where if I'm looking for business advice or industry advice, what I'm looking for is so nuanced and specific to what I'm working on that a book from 1997 isn't relevant. It's not current. It didn't have the internet. Some of these concepts exist and still exist, but with the rise of AI and how quickly everything is changing, I just find that a lot of those books are so outdated for where we are in 2025. I feel like they were even applicable 2-3 years ago, but everything is changing. And podcasts are so interesting, especially if it's an author of a book that you did want to read or did read, because you can get the additional nuggets and the context that wouldn't be in the book. And you can hear the enthusiasm or the tone of the person that wrote it. And my favorite part is that they're human beings that are alive right now that you could just reach out to the podcaster or to the guest that they had on, and then you can have a direct conversation with the person that maybe wrote that book. And then you can just talk to them directly, and they'll, again, going back to who you can ask them the direct questions. So I don't even have to read the whole book from 1997. And I could just have a 30-minute conversation with the source of information, and he's going to give me a tailored answer directly to my problem.
So any particular podcast or just any podcast? You just search for the person you're interested in and just listen to what
I would say. Find very esoteric things to what it is that you're working on. For me, the ones that I love right now are Invent With Me. It's called the Invent With Me podcast, and it is basically two guys that have invented things, and their entire journey is, we made all of the mistakes in inventing something so that you don't have to go through that. And if you're building a physical product that is a physical item you're going to sell people, I highly recommend Invent With Me. The other one I really love, I listen to ones related to both the ocean and seaweed as well as agriculture. So I really love the Ocean Age with Fed Dagabi. He really started as inside seaweed, and he's evolved to a broader ocean-based story. And so that helps me stay connected with what's going on in the ocean entrepreneurism. And then I also really love regenerative agriculture because my target audience is people who work in agriculture, and I need to make sure that I'm talking in the terms that they're talking about and learning more about the innovations in soil microbiology and all of the things that are happening there. And then to personally keep myself sane, there's a podcast called Do You Fucking Mind? And it is with this great woman named Alexis, who she is such like, she's not, I don't think she's a therapist, she's a psychologist, but she does such a great job of like just talking directly to everyone's souls and the current problems without any kind of floof in it. And so I think it's really just a matter of having some, different topics and learning from all of those along the way. And that to me has been a much better holistic education than reading an entrepreneur book.
Love that. I wasn't expecting that at all, but I appreciate the honesty. And you're right, like there's those kind of classic books that are great when you're looking for some high level kind of like entrepreneur, but like they are outdated so quickly now. So I love that. More podcast listeners. It's good for me. And yeah, I agree. I love podcasts too. Well, thanks very much, Emily. That's been a really, really fun conversation. Thanks for taking the time today to chat to me. As I said before, there's loads of other things I could chat about, and I'm sure offline about a couple of ideas that I've kind of buzzing around in my head after our conversation. But yeah, if anyone wants to find out more about Oceanmade or to connect with you, things like that, like where's the best place they can go to find out more and to follow your journey?
Yeah, you can follow us on LinkedIn. You can either connect with me directly if my name is Emily Power, or you can type in Oceanmade and find us there. There's also our website. And you can actually, if you're in America, you can go and buy Kelp Pots right now. They're available. And that's at www.ocean-made.com. And then, I would love for people to follow us on our Instagram journey. We're not on TikTok yet. I know I need to go there, but
yeah, it's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, you can find us on Instagram at Oceanmade Gardens. So would love for people to follow us there. We're, selfish plug, we're trying to build up our followers, so please do. We'd love a follow.
Nice. Right. Well, I'll drop all those in the description as well, so people can easily find them. Amazing. Thanks so much, Emily, again, and so excited to see where the journey goes, and follow you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rob. This was really fun. I really appreciate it. Thanks for just supporting us and having us on and being willing to listen to all of these things. But yeah, thank you so much.
So that's it for another episode of the Innovate Eco podcast. I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. Really love what Emily's building at Oceanmade, and really excited to see where that goes in future. And I'm sure she will eventually build the seaweed version of Amazon or the green version of Amazon. I'm sure she'll get there. As I said at the start, if you are new to the channel or if you're back, please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or we're now on YouTube as well if you want to see the video version. You please do rate the podcast or recommend it to a friend if you enjoyed it. And if you're out there and you're building a planet positive business of your own, or you know someone that is, then please do reach out, because I always love to hear from potential guests who reach out directly, or if there's someone that you think would make a good guest, that's always really helpful as well. So I'll leave the email address in the description as well, or you can reach out to me on social media too. As I said at the start, doing episodes like this every couple of weeks now, and then in the weeks in between, doing the Startup Diaries, where I'm trying to build a planet positive business of my own alongside my brother called No Longer Known. If you want to find out more about No Longer Known, listen to that podcast, or you can go to nolongerknown.com to read a bit about it and to hopefully subscribe to the mailing list as we build up to the product launch. So yeah, that's it for this week. Thank you again for being with me, for listening along. It really does mean a lot. And I'll be back in next week with the Startup Diaries, and then the week again after with another episode of the main Innovate Eco podcast. But until then, see you later.